Hello and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. My name is James, your host. I started this podcast to help other folks share their own healing stories and to interview thought leaders and experts in the carnivore, keto, and low oxalate space. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Equip Foods and the Carnivore Bar. As an affiliate, you can use the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products when you check out using the code Carnivorist. Thanks in advance for listening, subscribing, and any likes or shares. And now, on with the podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. It is season 4, and it's the premiere. And as always, I'm super excited about my guest today. Today's guest has over 50,000 followers on Instagram, where she dishes up recipes, spice blends, and inspiration. This lady was of super importance in my journey. Early on, I found an episode with her and my dear friend Casey Ruff where they went back and forth on a Q&A episode where they talked about tips for when you first go carnivore in 2021. And that's when I really started my carnivore journey in earnest, let's say. Lindasalant, the Carnitarian, welcome to Carnivorous Chats.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be able to sit down and talk with you.
Linda, the honor is all mine. And I really meant what I said. That episode for me was so inspirational and helpful that you did with Casey. I know you did an initial episode where he interviewed you on your journey, and then you went into sort of a bonus episode where you did the Q&A. But I literally send that episode out to a bunch of people all the time that want to have tips on starting carnivore and ask me, James, where did you start? How did you do it? I was like, click, send this, and listen to that episode. So helpful.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That makes me so happy to hear you say that. I'm really proud of that episodes, both that I did with Casey. And I'm so happy to hear that it was helpful to you and that you're sharing it. And hopefully it's helping all sorts of people. We gave some really great practical tips in those episodes.
Certainly did. And I'll make sure to link that episode in the show notes for today's episode, Linda. So thanks again for taking the time out of your day. And for those folks that have been living under a rock somewhere and aren't following you already on Instagram, I wonder if we could just get into your story, Linda, and how you first found this way of eating, because it's really interesting. And as we go along this journey, I think my listeners, and I had let you know beforehand when I sent the information to you about today's recording, that I have a lot of followers because I came from a very high oxalate background. And as I mentioned to you, Sally Norton and her work, it really literally saved my life. And I know for you sort of got into this way of eating because of interstitial cystitis, and that can not sometimes, but oftentimes be a result of a high oxalate diet. But I won't keep going now. I'll let you tell your story.
Yeah. So the discovery that carnivore helps with interstitial cystitis came after I started carnivore. I'll be honest with you. I started carnivore just looking to lose a few pounds and trying to get back into a ketogenic diet. When I went back into ketogenic Facebook land, I came across the Zeroing In on Health group, which was talking about this crazy all meat diet. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, let me try this. And there were some great conversations going on. It all sort of made sense to me. It was what I was looking for in that sort of Atkins ketogenic induction diet that worked well for me in the past, minus the broccoli, spinach, kale, and low carbohydrate vegetables. And I was like, well, that's good for me. Sign me up, because I can do 30 days of just the meats. That's cool with me. Meat and blue cheese and eggs and fish and all the things. And so I did that. And then I realized that there were these other improvements, like improvement in the interstitial cystitis, which if you have not experienced the pain of interstitial cystitis, it's debilitating, and it causes depression, it causes anxiety, because it is so hard to function and do the day-to-day things. When you go to a doctor with that kind of bladder pain, they just assume that you've got a UTI, and it feels very much like a urinary tract infection, but it's not helped with antibiotics. But getting rid of those high oxalate foods that Sally talks about, that is a huge help for preventing the symptoms and pain of interstitial cystitis. So yeah, that was definitely one of the things that improved. And things like, first thing that I noticed really was that knee pain went away in my joints, which is also another symptom of high oxalate diet. And so, for all those people out there doing like what you were doing and juicing and eating low carb, high oxalate vegetables, it's like you think you're doing good for yourself, but really you're hurting yourself. And you have all these great intentions to stay healthy. And typically it's the people who are actively trying to stay healthy that get themselves into this situation because they go so heavy on the high oxalate foods and they are trying so hard to get nutrition that nutrition, all those, plant nutrients that everyone says you need, right? Those phytonutrients, they come along with a lot of oxalate and they come along with a lot of issues. And so the mass amount of spinach juicing that people do, it causes a lot of problems. And I was having a lot of spinach before I went carnivore for sure.
Linda, that sums up my experience, all puns intended, in a nutshell.
in,
Because
in a high oxalate nutshell.
in a high oxalate nutshell, and I won't, for those listeners that have heard my story many, many times, I literally, to use a quote from a dear friend of mine who uses that as their tagline is I juiced my way to hell. I literally thought I was doing the best, absolute best thing for my health, for the planet, and everything else. And I was so sick. And of course, I had to double down to cure myself based on the dogma that is rife within a lot of nutrition spaces. I mean, it was just awful. And I know from listening to podcasts with you that even when prior to going low carb and getting into keto, you then also ate a lot of almond stuff, as I did. I was drinking almond milk and almond flour, and I literally felt like I had, like you, I had severe kidney pain, bladder pain, always when I was urinating. And it was literally all the tons of oxalates that were coming out. I
Mm.
literally felt like I had a bladder infection all the time. I was running back and forth to my GP going, what is going on here? And they would prescribe antibiotics, which of course never worked. But the moment I lowered my oxalate intake and started getting out all those vegetables and fruits that I was bombing myself with, things started to improve.
It's incredible, isn't it? It's just incredible the difference it makes. And people will argue with you and say, oh, no, James, you're missing out on some, high quality nutrition, but you know better at this point. You don't need that. And almond milk, I don't know why people still want to hang on to that. Almond milk seems to be a holdout, I think, because it's low calorie. They think it's just water, but it's like oxalate water. It's not just water.
So the first things you notice, Linda, were the interstitial cystitis improving, really, I think. I've also heard you talk about, and this was the absolute epiphany for me, is like when I added back in animal foods, my change in mental state. I was always anxious. I was clinically depressed. My GP wanted to put me on antidepressants. I was like, but I'm not, I have never been on depressed before. I don't need these. I actually
Mm.
never ended up taking them. But now looking back, I can clearly see how much anxiety and depression that I had because I'm a totally different person. And people remark on it all the time. James, not only do you look different, you carry yourself differently now. You don't seem as high strung. You're more relaxed, the carnivore zen. And I know you experienced that too, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible. I was, and maybe some of it was from the pain and the inflammation, but I was super anxious and depressed and would get myself into these states where it was like I would spend all day in bed. Like, who does that? I was canceling dance lessons. I love dancing. I want to go 6 days a week. If I could go 6 days a week, 7 days a week, I would go. But I would have appointments where I would call that morning and I would lose that lesson. It wasn't even like, okay, I can reschedule. You don't get to reschedule. That money is gone. And I was canceling because I was just feeling like I couldn't get myself out of bed. I had low motivation. I was having panic attacks quite frequently, where I would have to literally chill myself out in a dark closet to calm down, waking up at night trying to calm down, knowing that there's nothing wrong with me. Like nothing happened in the middle of the night to cause me any stress. It's not like anything happened or I got a phone call or anything like that. Just waking up feeling like panicked. And yeah, I don't have that now. I mean, it's kind of nice to want to do things, to make a plan for the day and actually, you know, get through your tasks for the day without bailing because you're just not feeling up to it or you're feeling anxious and nervous. Like it's life changing to get rid of that kind of anxiety.
It certainly is. And here's an example, Linda. I just literally got back yesterday from traveling in my past life, if I had made that trip, I would have been a nervous, anxious wreck. When I was flying or traveling, I was always high strung. I was literally,
Mm.
everyone that I traveled with remarked on it. Like they didn't want to travel with me because I was always, oh, we're going to miss a flight. We gotta go over here. This trip, everything was calm, cool, easy. Even when stuff didn't go the way it was planned, I was like, it'll be all right. It'll be
I
good.
love it.
It's just,
It's so nice. I mean, I talk often about like stress less carnivore, and I try to make carnivore sort of like easy for people to do. And keep. I love this idea of people being able to keep their mellow. And carnivore sort of gives you this nice mellow. I mean, not for everybody. There are definitely situations where diet is not going to fix like major mental problems. There are other things that you have to work through. It's not just diet. But if you've got the advantage of like carnivore diet, you're already starting from such a great place where you're nourishing your brain, you're getting the right energy, you're not filling yourself with plant toxins. Like you've just got this great ability to like stay mellow and like enjoy life. Absolutely. And then there are these people that want to complicate it and make it like really serious. And I'm just like, no, carnivore is supposed to allow you to stay mellow.
Linda, we talked a little bit about your IC, interstitial cystitis. I want to just touch on initially, and then we're going to delve into it a little deeper in our conversation today, is another thing that you wanted to take care of, and that is the lipedema. I've had a few guests on that have used the carnivore diet to really assist them with lipedema, and I know that was a battle for you. Can you let the listeners know what exactly that is? What are the symptoms associated with it? I did a little bit of digging leading into today's episode with you, and I was just intrigued because I was like going, wow, I may know a few people that have this and don't realize that they do. So please, the floor is yours.
Right. So, I mean, I'm not a lipedema expert, but I will say, having lived with it and experiencing the symptoms, basically, you can describe it as an adipofascial disease. It's a sort of a dysfunction of both the fat and the fascia that sort of like, it's not the visceral fat, it's that subcutaneous fat generally. And it generally presents in women specifically, sometimes in men. And generally, and everybody experiences it differently, but generally, people with lipedema will have a disproportion of their upper body fat percentage, their lower body fat percentage, or their total body fat percentage versus what of that is coming from the legs. So, along with that disproportionate size, it's not just about weight or size, there's also bruising that's unexplained. There's pain that is like either constant or comes on heavier later on in the day. There's a swelling, a heaviness, like an achy feeling. Um, Things like if a cat walks across your lap, you want to just die, scream in pain because it hurts so much. And not everybody gets that pain component, but basically there's a problem with our fat cells where they don't function like normal obese fat cells. So in regular standard obesity, where the fat cells are they say sort of fixed in quantity. And if you take in too much energy, you're storing too much fat, your fat cells grow, they become overstuffed, you end up diabetic, like you're a type 2 diabetic, right? Like that pathway sort of continues. For people with lipedema, there's increased proliferation of stem cells. So stem cells will differentiate into fat cells, and we can grow more fat cells, almost an unlimited amount of fat cells in that lipedemic tissue. So rather than our fat cells becoming overstuffed, resistant to insulin, and then we become diabetic, we just make more fat cells and we just keep storing fat cells. And we typically don't become diabetic. So the obesity that comes with lipedema typically doesn't come with diabetes, and it doesn't give you those early like warnings. People will just think, oh, I've got a little bit of weight, but you don't get those signals of like insulin resistance. That's not what's happening. My insulin stays very low. So So basically what happens is you have to be very careful. I've had to be very careful with how much energy I put into the system. And I find that that's really helpful with lipedema because the more energy that you take in, and when we're talking about a carnivore diet, you're talking about, fat for energy, not carbohydrates for energy. That energy gets stored. But when you have lipedema, keeping your insulin low is not enough to get that energy back out. And so you've got to sort of walk this fine line of how much energy can I take in, store, and use, and how can I balance what I absolutely need to take in, because you need fat for absorption of minerals, vitamins and minerals, and you need fat for energy. And you know that once you take in that energy, your fat cells have sort of a different way of signaling. They're not as willing to release that fat for energy. So it's this really fine line. I'm still working on, changing body composition and trying to get that lipedema fat reduced. But it's very frustrating. It's a sort of a frustrating condition because for most people, if you just, like they say, you reduce your energy to a point where you're in a slight calorie deficit and you keep insulin low, you're going to lose fat. And that recipe works for most people, but it doesn't seem to work for people with lipedema. And the women with lipedema have been like sort of shamed for overeating or not being able to control themselves, or at worst, lying about what they're eating. And so they'll go to practitioners and they'll say, I'm eating literally 800 calories a day. And they're not lying. And they keep gaining. And the doctors are like, well, you're lying. And we can all say, calories in, calories out. If you're eating 800 calories a day, you're lying. You would be emaciated. But I'm telling you, I hear the stories so frequently that the women are basically malnourished to the point of where they're like anorexic, truly, but the fat just keeps accumulating. And so it's a very frustrating condition. It's filled with all sorts of, like I said, it's filled with shame and it's filled with embarrassment and, beyond the physical limitations of lipedema, there's all of these, psychological challenges that women with later stage lipedema face because they go out and you can't hide the size of your legs in all situations. So it's a sort of really frustrating condition. And, the best I can hope for is to maintain my stage 1, which I have been able to do, and not progress to stage 3, stage 4 lipedema, which can lead to more problems with lymphatics and then secondary lymphedema. It can get pretty crazy if it's not controlled. And unfortunately, the advice of eat less, move more just isn't working for the women with lipedema. I think the advice really needs to be, controlling the amount of energy that you're taking in, not to a point of starvation, but understanding that you've got to both keep insulin low and you've got to do some movement and you've got to work on gaining muscle. And we face all these challenges that it's not as easy as calories in, calories out for us. And it's not as easy as just keeping insulin down for us.
Super helpful and also super interesting for me, Linda, to, as I say to you leading up to our episode, for me to just do a little bit of a dive into it because I knew about lipedema. I didn't understand the nuances behind it. And, one of the interesting things is on even the WebMD site and all the other quote unquote medical advice sites that they recommend an anti-inflammatory diet for lipedema. And what's better than a carnivore diet in terms
Right.
of being anti-inflammatory? So, but as you say, and I'll put a pin in the lipedema discussion just for the minute, we're going to get back to it. But as you say, it's so nuanced and so individual. And that takes me back to where you first began on this carnivore journey, just to ask you, since that infamous and episode I'm going to share with yourself and Casey giving tips, I know you're like me and you're a big believer in number one, experimenting on yourself. It doesn't hurt to try. We're talking about a diet here. We're not talking about medications. I am a big advocate and proponent of experimenting. And as my listeners know, I tried everything. I
Mhm.
really did. And I continue to adapt my diet to this day. For those folks that are looking to start on a carnivore diet, maybe they're hearing this episode, or maybe they're and can relate to interstitial cystitis or lipedema. Would you change anything that you said to in terms of tips? Do you have any tips for folks that are first starting out on the diet? What would you say?
You know, general beginner advice is to start with what you can sustain, I think is good advice. Like I say, try and keep the mellow. So when you get into looking at carnivore accounts, you'll see there's this like buffet of things that you've got to dip into. Like you've got to start hacking into this, you've got to say, oh, we're just going to do meat and water. Like you've got to be super strict. That's the way it's got to be, or you've got to add honey or you've got to add fruit, right? There's that door that you can open. Or you can say, don't worry about calories at all, just eat all you want of whatever fatty cuts, whatever that means, right? What's the definition of fatty cut, right? Who figured out the percentage of that? What does that exactly mean to you versus me? And don't do dairy, or yes, do dairy, do lots of butter, stuff like this. Do what you can that's sustainable. So the way I started carnivore was like, I wouldn't change it. I would probably have cut out a little bit of the amount of time that I spent doing high fat carnivore, because while that helped me, it didn't help me do the body recomp that I was hoping for. So when I started carnivore, I was eating all the fatty cuts of meat, which to me was just the ribeye and the burgers and bacon. And I was eating a lot of oxtail. And, I started going deep into high fat, and I was having suet and, lots of egg yolks and all that. And sure, I was getting all of the benefits of carnivore and all of this healing. My weight was staying generally the same, and I had lost a few pounds of inflammation doing that. I was feeling great, and I was like, this is the way. But I found a better way for me. And so, yeah, experimenting is huge. And so you want to kind of listen to all the opinions out there, find a path that you think you can sustain. And if that means keeping heavy cream in your coffee in the morning, then keep the heavy cream in your coffee. If that's going to keep you from doing a version of carnivore at all, like if someone says, well, I can't do carnivore because I really love cheese and you're supposed to just do meat and water, do the cheese. It's going to be better than saying, well, then you'll have to just do standard American diet. So do it in a way that's sustainable. If that means including spices, include spices. If it means including some condiments, include condiments. Now, there are some people who come from like a food addiction background where any sweet taste, I'm going to say, you've got to get rid of it, because there's no point in dragging out an addiction. But if that's not where you're coming from, it's not an addiction. It's going to help you sustain a very low carbohydrate carnivore diet. Do it that way to start. And then when you start feeling better and you start seeing symptoms resolve, you may find the motivation to become stricter in your carnivore diet. But there's no sense in going, like, as they say, balls to the wall, and then you can only last a week and a half and say, I can't do this. This is insane. I have no social life. Like I am unable to eat anywhere but my house because I can only eat grass-fed meat. It's insane to think that that's sustainable for most people, especially in the beginning. When I started listening to more podcasts about the importance of protein, that's when I shifted to do the experiment. And I was like, I'm going to see if this little tweak, it's still carnivore, but it's just a little tweak in percentages, if that's going to help me. And I was just absolutely blown away. So, you know, if you want to put labels on it, the high protein carnivore approach, but a high protein carnivore approach is still a high fat diet. So, it's difficult to say whether I'm high fat or high protein because I'm kind of both.
I really appreciate your stance, Linda, and thank you again, because the amount of, let's just say, information that is out there talking to people about you need to eat a ton of fat on carnivore diet to lose fat. And we've just hit on this. We've just talked about how nuanced and individualistic this whole approach is. I mean, here's me, for example. I'm not going to talk about eating fat, but for me, my high oxalate background, thank goodness the divine intervention that I had, that I came across Sally Norton first, because if this exactly happened to me being the bullheaded male that I am. I'm like, right, vegetables are out. All those oxalate vegetables are out. That nearly killed me. And I just took out everything all at once. And then, of course, about 3 months in, the oxalate dumping symptoms started, and they started
Mm.
harshly, to the point where I reached out to, God bless her, Sally, on Instagram and said, Sally, help, what's going on? The diet's not working anymore. I'm getting all the pains back. She goes, well, do you have any oxalate in your diet currently? I'm like, no. She's like, oh dear, you need to get some back in to slow this process down, because your body's going, okay, it's the bombing stop. It's time to get it all out, the stuff we've stored. So for me, I kept blueberries and bananas in. I removed the bananas eventually, and I've just tinkered with it to see what makes me feel the best. And actually, ironically, recently, since I eliminated dairy, I added the bananas back in, and I realized, wow, that nagging shoulder pain that I had, which was probably oxalate dumping. Sally often talks about that rhomboid area gets really inflamed with oxalate dumping, and mine was awful, to the point where chiropractic acupuncture couldn't touch it.
Wow.
I added bananas, a little bit more carbs back in, or oxalate related stuff, bananas and blueberries, and completely disappeared. Actually, like 2 days after I added
Incredible.
back in. So I say that all to say is, here's an example. We were just talking about lipedema and how you use an analogy where you're talking about the warehousing of fat on the body. It's such a great one. And you alluded to it earlier, but people that have lipedema or think they may have to be very careful with the amount of fat that they have. And I'm so interested to hear about when you made this switch to this higher protein approach. What happened? Did you notice the benefits right away? It's still ongoing, obviously, but what sort of things changed for you?
I really did start to notice the benefits right away. I did a 10-week experiment and I had done a DEXA after that 10 weeks. Now I didn't do a DEXA before, like at the 10, at the 0 and at the 10 week, but I had a DEXA done from, I think, a year and a half prior. And there was a large difference, and you can see it in the picture, that there was this huge shift in the size of my hips and in my thighs from doing that 10-week experiment. And at the start, it wasn't obvious to me, but because the weight doesn't necessarily change, but the body composition changes so much. And so that's why I recommend to people to do something like an InBody or a DEXA, because the scale won't give you that information the way a DEXA will give you that information. So I had increased muscle mass and I had decreased fat just from switching the proportions. And I was so happy. And there was a time when for whatever reason, I sunk back into my high fat approach, and I started again eating, the beef ribs and lots of bacon and lots of ribeye. And then the next time I went for that next DEXA, things had slid in the wrong direction. I had gained more fat and I had lost muscle mass. And so it has just been huge. And now in the last 3 DEXAs that I've gotten, the progress has been consistent. And being able to see fat reduction where they tell you it's impossible to lose that fat, and I see it happening, it's so encouraging to me, because prior to getting all of those DEXAs, I was going down the surgery rabbit hole, which is the path that most women with lipedema go down, because they tell you diet and exercise aren't going to touch this. The only solution is liposuction. And I don't know of people who've been able to reduce their lipedema, other than just a few people that I've been in touch with, and they do low inflammatory diet. And so the diet really does matter. Energy matters, movement matters, and it can go down. You do have to sort of be aware of what you're taking in, and that's not what people want to hear, because it reminds them of the people who have told them their whole lives they're eating too much. And it's not about eating too much. Some of these people are eating too little. It's just about getting in the right amount of energy that you can, and getting in the right amount of protein that you can start building muscle and doing some recomposition and getting your metabolism to work a little bit better and slowly chipping away at that dysfunctional fat. It is so slow. It is really, really slow. I mean, I've been in this now for 9 years, a carnivore. And so the progress that I've made over the last 2 years has been huge to me, huge. But 2 years, we're talking about 6 pounds of fat lost. Most people can drop 6 pounds of fat in 6 months if they're really dedicated to it. And let me tell you, there's nobody more dedicated than the women with lipedema. Like, we are really trying, but it is a slow, slow process to chip away at that fat.
I want to continue on this sort of discussion on your journey into discovery on the lipedema and what you've gone through. And super interesting because you're the first person I've really heard talk about switching from high fat over to a higher protein. Another thing, as a woman speaking, that I found very interesting because as a man, my listeners know that I've shared this on a vegan diet. My testosterone went down to almost just the lowest level I possibly could have had. When I went to my GP, he was like, wow. Thankfully, I've gone back and retested since. My levels are back up to the normal range. Now, mind you, I'm 52 almost now. So I'm going to keep my eye on it. In fact, I just reread Dr. Ken Berry's book and, Lies My Doctor Told Me. And he has a chapter in there about hormones. So this ties all into lipedema because when I was, again, researching, I found interesting the hormonal component that has to do with lipedema as women age specifically. I'm just talking about women now also, but also in your journey and your discovery with your testosterone levels. I wonder if you could share that with the listeners too, because it's very interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not completely sure how much uh what the role of like typical sex hormones are on lipedema, but I can tell you that typically women with lipedema have a very low muscle mass for the amount of weight that they hold. So a standard person, a regular person who's just overweight will have increased muscle mass because they're moving around a larger mass during the day, right? So their muscles are generally larger than smaller people. This is just, what it is. But when you look at women with lipedema, they have a low muscle mass. And I wonder if it is because of low testosterone that's happening. And I think that's not yet been shown. I will have to continue to look for studies about if that relates, low testosterone in women with lipedema. I'm not sure that that's a thing. But for me, getting the extra testosterone, finding out that I had low testosterone sort of opened up this opportunity for getting more muscle where I already had like not a dysfunctional amount, but a low amount of muscle, like a disproportionately low amount of muscle. When I went for the DEXAs, the guy who was interpreting the DEXA, the tech would say to me, Linda, you really shouldn't be this upset that you have this much body fat because your percentage is only so high because your muscle mass is so low. And I'm like, well, why is my muscle mass so low? I'm doing all of this dancing. I do all of these workouts. Like, why is my muscle mass so low? And now with the HRT, I'm finding that muscle mass has gone up. I've gotten an increased 9 pounds of muscle mass. And I'm not in the gym pressing to 85. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just doing the same stuff that I was doing before, but the muscle mass in my arms, in my legs has grown significantly. And so that helps with metabolism. I mean, the signaling that comes from the organ that is our muscle is so important in our overall metabolism that it helps in so many things. So I love when people go get their levels checked, because if that testosterone is missing, your mood might not be what it could be, and your anxiety levels may be not what they should be, and your muscle mass, you're not going to be able to get that muscle protein synthesis the way that you would if you had a normal level of testosterone. And so I'm not sure for me how long I had low testosterone, but according to the doctor that I spoke to, she was like, well, the level is this low. It's been low for a long time. And we know with carnivore, it's not for lack of nutrients. It's not for lack of cholesterol or those good hormone producing fats. Like they're there. Like I said, a high protein carnivore diet is in no way a low fat diet. I'm still getting a lot of fat in my diet, and prior to switching to a higher protein approach, I was getting a lot of fat in my diet. And so who knows exactly why the testosterone was low, but I am feeling much better with higher levels. And, I recommend that people get that checked.
Absolutely. Men and women. And you just heard Linda talking about the importance of women looking at their testosterone levels. Dr. Berry talked about it in his book. Typically, they go check on the estrogen and progesterone, but testosterone just as important for women to have the right levels for themselves. So I appreciate that. And for the watchers on YouTube that are watching the video of this recording, you may have just seen that we all got tickets to the Linda Salant gun show, because when she put back her arm, we saw those biceps, Linda. I'm telling you, I was like, dang.
I'm not going to do that again.
No, you should be very proud. And we're
That's
talking about,
funny.
no, it's absolutely true. You were talking about the muscle mass that you've been able to put on since, adding this higher protein. And I was like, that's a perfect example right there, your arms. And we're going to get into the ballroom dancing at the end, but I know that's a very high energy and very strenuous form of exercise for the body. So we'll talk about that. Let's just hone in a little bit, because I'm sure the listeners are going, okay, James and Linda, we've heard all about, and we've been eating this high fat way of carnivore because that's all we've been hearing. And I know how to do the sort of the high fat, because there's literally a million videos out there of talking about how to eat high fat carnivore. What does a day of eating look like for you now, Linda, on this higher protein side, for example?
Thank you for asking. I would love to promote more people doing it sort of in a higher protein approach, because when you're doing high fat carnivore and you're focusing on 80-20 and you're focusing on eating as much fat as you can, things tend to go awry for people. And a lot of people found that out when, eating all of the brown butter and all the sticks of butter came into favor a few years ago. And then people who had been doing carnivore for a long time started gaining weight. And they said, well, I don't understand. How this happened, because I'm still doing carnivore. And it's like, well, you kind of just you went overboard. And so where high fat carnivore leans in heavy on fatty ribs, rib eyes, adding butter to your steaks, adding butter to your ground beef, or putting tallow on top of your ground beef, I think a higher protein approach is actually much simpler, because you're just eating the cuts without the added fats. And so if you ate nothing, like Michaela Peterson, if you ate nothing but strip loin, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's a higher protein, lower fat carnivore approach that she's doing. It's like if you're eating lamb loins and you're not eating all of the fat that comes around the lamb, you're just eating the meat, it's a higher protein, lower fat approach. And you don't have to do anything special. You don't have to be having protein powders. I love my protein powder in the morning. I put it in my coffee. I love to use things like non-fat Greek yogurt to increase my protein, but you don't have to do that. If you stuck with simple cuts like sirloin or picanha, everybody loves top sirloin cap, right? And if you just eat that meat, you'll find yourself in a higher protein, lower fat, probably about a 60-40 ratio there. And you can do that with, like I said, with strip steaks, with sirloin steaks, with round steaks. When you don't add the extra fat, you just are in a normal eat the meat. So like that's the approach. What's interesting is on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, I had put out a poll about New York strip, and I had put the percentage, and I said, I think it was 38% fat. The New York strip loin steak was, I think, 38% fat. And I said, is this to you just a New York strip? It's a steak. It's a New York strip steak. Is this fatty meat, or is this too lean to be considered fatty meat? And it was split exactly down the middle, 50-50. Like, so 50-50. And so the problem with saying eat all the fatty meat is, like I said, people aren't on the same page about what that even means. And so someone may be having success saying, I eat nothing but fatty meat, and that's what you should do too. And don't worry about calories, because if you just eat the fatty meat, you're going to be fine. Now, if that fatty meat is strip loin, then yeah, I agree with you. But if you're saying to somebody who's 5'2", like I'm 5'2", 130 pounds, eat all the fatty meat you want, and then that person is like, okay, and then they go to ribeye, they're going to find themselves in an energy surplus. And so it's just a matter of figuring out how much food you need and then selecting the cuts that work for you. You can do a small period of time with tracking your food. And some people don't enjoy tracking, but it's a great way to understand how much fat you're getting and how much protein you're getting. And if you make tweaks and you see which cuts give you a better uh, quantity of protein versus fat, you can sort of then use that information later on and not have to track. And so just, for me, I understand that if I lean in on sirloin, it's going to get me exactly where I need to be. If I lean into ribeye one day, then I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to have this ribeye meal, and then I'm going to go a little bit lighter and I'm going to have, some tuna for a different meal because that's like super lean. And I just balance cuts that way. And then you don't have to necessarily do the tracking. With time, that kind of intuitive eating can work for people.
What for you then would you say we know about the, let's say, the more underrated cuts for the higher fat carnivore diet? People often talk about chuck eyes and, roasts and things like that. For the higher protein diet, you talked about sirloin. Are there any other cuts that folks could go to? Because they're probably saying to themselves, I only know about tenderloin and it's so expensive. I know we, what are
Yeah,
some
I
other
mean,
ones?
and tenderloin, to be honest with you, is very lean. If you leaned in just on tenderloin, you'd be too lean, like so that's a specific cut that is really lean. It's the chicken breast of beef. You know what I mean? It is like so super lean. So you probably want to add some bacon with your tenderloin. But yeah, I mean, sirloin steaks, flat iron steaks, picanha, and any kind of round, like bottom round, top round, those are going to be like the leaner cuts. You would want to just not do the things like the belly. Yeah. And then ground beef is so helpful because when you go to the store, you can figure out exactly like what you're getting and you can adjust your macros just from picking up a different package. So if you're used to doing, that 70% lean ground beef and you switch to 85% lean ground beef, like that, what a simple switch. It doesn't get easier than that. And I've been leaning into ground beef a lot lately. And so I find that to be super helpful. You don't have to go all the way to 93% lean, but even something like an 85% lean ground beef is going to get you a higher protein approach.
Linda, this segues perfectly into what I'm going to ask you about next, and that is, of course, your Instagram account. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, you've got almost like 53,000 followers now. And I can tell you, I think I helped at least contribute to a couple of those because I send people your way. I often
I
think now,
appreciate that.
as an Instagrammer myself, I often think about maybe I should make a video about this. And I go, nope, Linda's done a better one than I could ever have done that already. And I just direct them to your folks. Literally, there are so many tips. And when I first started, I followed you on Instagram after I heard the episode with Casey. And I was like, oh my gosh, she just makes this so easy. She's got tips on doing soft boiled eggs, on making the perfect chicken wings, taking the membrane off of ribs. I remember those ones, your pork belly churros, so many things. What was the inspiration for you to start that Instagram account, and how do you keep it going? It's really so much fun.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. You're like the first person to ask me this, why I started the Instagram account. And I'll be honest with you, like people don't realize this. So I have a daughter now, she's older, obviously. And she was like doing Instagram. And I was like, I need to like understand what the kids are doing these days. And I had been doing carnivore. And so one of my friends said to me, well, why don't you just start like a meatstagram, And I was like, you think people would want to watch that? And I had no idea how to do Instagram. So I started this little account and I started just posting pictures of old things that I had done in that previous year, you know. And I got kind of like a good response. People seemed to be interested in the pictures of the food. And so I was like, okay, we'll just keep this going. And it just kind of steamrolled. And along the way, that Instagram community has taught me stuff and inspired me to try new recipes. And I I really enjoy getting the feedback from people when they make my recipes, when they tag me and they show me how they tried. Like it makes me so happy. So I do continue to do that. It's a fun thing for me. It's kind of like it takes up a lot of time. It really does, but it's fun. And I don't post posts as much as I used to because just, crafting the words and whatever takes more time. But I'm in stories every day. I'm posting something, typically what I'm eating or, what my day is doing.
And folks, let me tell you, when you go there, and I am still envious of the photos of your beef when you take it and you're sliding, and it's always cooked so good and it looks so delicious. I'm like, dang, that looks good. I'm gonna have to try this. So great.
I'll have to make a meal for you one day, well, for everybody. I want to have a big thing where everybody comes and I do the cooking. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Oh my gosh, that would be the best thing ever. And I would be super honored. So yeah, let's make this happen for
I would
sure,
love it.
Linda. Couple of last things as we end out, Linda, and thank you again for your time today. It's been so great and have to have you back for sure. We talked a little bit offline before the start of the episode about you being a member of the Savory Institute. And, as I've delved into uh, the carnivore space and regenerative meat, I had Will Harris from White Oak Pastures on, and we talked about, White Oak being a big hub for the Savory Institute in the US. We were talking a little bit about your membership and let's just say some of the misinformation there is surrounding the US farmers in particular out there. I wonder if you could just elaborate on that and what that means to you.
Yeah, so I am a huge fan of the Savory Institute, and I love the way that they're promoting sort of like a better standard for producing beef around the world. Because around the world, they are not as efficient as what we are, as we are here in the US. So people like to, say negative things about our commodity beef and the way that US beef is raised and manufactured. But at the end of the day, all US beef is highly sustainable. We do it in such an efficient way. And you do see these extreme cases where people will, videos will blow up of, animal abuse, things that are not the norm for the industry. And they always say, feedlots are horrible and they're bad for the environment. And regenerative agriculture is the only way to do it. And sometimes what happens is people will equate regenerative agriculture with solely somebody like Will Harris and White Oak Pastures, because they have the ability to, on their land, which happens to be in Georgia, which is, fertile soil, great climate, they have the ability to raise cattle on that land year round and have them on pasture year round and not do any grain feeding year round. And they can say all that and do that very well. And it works efficiently for them. And they do great work. They also sell direct to consumer. But what happens is there are hundreds of thousands of, or tens of thousands probably, of small farmers across the US also doing really great work that don't have the ability to sell direct to consumer, or they don't have the ability to have their cows out on pasture all year round where they do feed grain, or they they do something that somebody would consider as non-regenerative for some portion of time. And I get frustrated when people say the only way to support regenerative agriculture is to support that local farmer who's selling to you directly, because there are a ton of local farmers. I mean, every farmer is local to somebody, right? Like every neighborhood is somebody's neighborhood. So all those small local farmers that have a small head count of cattle, they don't have the ability to process that cattle the way White Oak Pastures has the ability to process cattle, because they've got a processing plant. They have so much land and such a huge head count that they can efficiently, and it makes business sense for them to process cows on their land. Most small landowners, small farmers can't afford a processing facility. So those cattle have to go for finishing and processing somewhere else. And then all of a sudden, people say, well, that's not good meat anymore. If we're not supporting those small farmers, which are the majority of farmers in the US, if we're not going to the supermarket and buying that meat that came from their cows, we've lost the plot. because then we really are going to lose the bulk of our farmers. And so while I support the Savory Institute, I'm sometimes hesitant to discuss how we should support regenerative agriculture, regenerative farmers, because people have in their mind that that doesn't include supermarket beef. And it really does. Like it really, really does. If you don't buy that supermarket beef, and we can talk about the problems and the pathways from farmer to packer to supermarket, and there are issues there, but without supporting that system currently, we would lose all those farmers. So I think it's important to discuss that all U.S. beef is sustainable, all U.S. beef is efficient and good and healthful, and you don't have to eat just grass-fed, and you don't have to just buy the meat directly from your farmer.
Excellent point, and all puns intended, some great food for thought there, because I really hadn't thought about that, Linda, till we discussed that offline earlier. And I'm so thankful that were able to share that with the audience, because it really does make sense what you're suggesting. And, to take a phrase that I heard from Scott on his podcast, the Carnivore Cast now, the Scott Mize show, is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I know he took that from elsewhere, but that goes for everything. That goes for everything we talked about today, because, from the suggestion that you only should be buying grass-fed and grass-finished beef, get what you can afford, get what's, local to you. If you have a supermarket, you don't have a farmer pretty close to you, just get that supermarket beef, because goodness knows we need to support anything that has to do with farming anyway. So don't just forego nutrition just because you've heard that this is the best thing for you, right?
Absolutely. Right. It's important because that supermarket beef is what is supporting the local farmers around you. I mean, if you were to go and look and search for farmers near you that sell direct, you may find one or two farmers near you that sell direct, but likely there are dozens of farmers around you. They're just not selling direct. But it's important to support them, and but that beef ends up in the supermarket system. So, I highly recommend.
Again, using myself as an example, I'm out here in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on the island of Bermuda. We have to import all our beef. We have a few small dairy farms and some chicken egg, egg farmers here, and some local produce farmers, but no beef abattoirs, nothing like that. So we have to import all our
Wow.
beef. So I have to get the best that I can. And people often ask me, James, are you only eating grass-fed and finished? I'm like, no, because if you understood the price that I have to pay here being imported, I just get what's affordable to me. And
Right.
yeah, do the best you can when you can, and try not to stress about it too much.
Yes. Stress
Because
less.
yes, because as we know, and to tie back into what we were talking about, high stress can lead to low testosterone too. And I know that occurred for me. That was me. And I told you about my vegan days being highly anxious and stressed out. And no wonder my poor testosterone was in the tank there at the bottom of the tank.
Mm.
But Linda, as we end out, I want to talk about your recent foray into, we were having a laugh about this offline, the podcasting world. You just did your first sort of full length episode with a mutual friend and Coach Bronson. So I'll put the link to that in the
Yeah.
show notes. What's going on there?
Thank
YouTube
you.
in. Awesome.
Yeah, so this is really fun. I've had a YouTube channel up for a few years, and there have been subscribers there just kind of waiting for videos. And I had not posted any videos, maybe just some promo spots, right? And that's about all I've been doing. But then I was able to I got a tip from someone who told me about someone who could help me do the editing. And I was like, well, that's a huge barrier for me because I know nothing about video editing. I know nothing about how things really should look or be on YouTube. And so anyway, with some help, I said, okay, let's do it. And so having Bronson on first was tremendous. I love Bronson. He's great, super motivating. And the response to that episode has been fantastic. So I'm just going to keep it going. Actually, tomorrow I'm interviewing, you may know Michelle Hearn. She's over at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. And we're going to be having a chat. So she'll be up next. And I've got some other people on coming on too. It's going to be great. So we're going to do more chats like that, hopefully inspire some more people. get some great information out there to help people do carnivore in a mellow and sustainable way, not environmentally sustainable, just sort of lifestyle sustainable. When I say sustainable, that's what I mean, like something that people can really keep doing daily and do it in a low stress way, get them some information, cut through the noise. And yeah, I mean, it's been fun. Like I had to ask you, like, what does it mean to have is a YouTube channel a podcast now? Because I'm thinking like people don't use iPods anymore. Like, what's a podcast now? I don't know. So we'll see. I'm new to all of this, but the response has been great. And so anyway, everybody go over there, like and subscribe.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, Linda, as I mentioned to you, when I first heard your voice, you have that voice that's just calming and very easy to listen to. So you're a natural at this. And
Thank you.
speaking of naturals, let's talk a little bit at the end of this episode about your other passion. Let's put this dietary stuff aside. Let's talk about
Yeah.
that ballroom dancing. I mean, I know
Um,
I heard Casey ask you about it, but how's it going? Have you gotten back into the competitions? You must be doing some now again, are you?
yeah. I've got a competition actually coming up in a couple of weeks. I think I'm 3 weeks out from my next competition. That's going to be in Virginia. I'm super excited about it. You know what? Ballroom is great. Ballroom is the kind of workout that you can do until you drop dead. I mean, it's so much fun. It's such a stress reliever. I really do look forward to every time I head to the studio. And yeah, I had been doing like one competition a year, but and that went to two competitions, and this year we're going to do three competitions. So I love it. I mean, it's great. It's really good fun. I highly suggest if you haven't tried it, head to a Fred Astaire near you and just give it a go. Like it's a great workout and it's really good for the mind. And like I said, it's something you can keep up with for the rest of your life. So where, some people may think like, what is the point of my going to the gym and like starting lifting? Like, what am I going to be, a bodybuilder? Like what's my end goal here? But you can be a dancer for your whole life and enjoy that forever, and it's a great hobby. I love it so much.
When did you first start, Linda? How long have you been doing it?
Oh, it seems like forever. My husband and I started at a Fred Astaire because when we were about to get married, I said, well, we're going to have our first dance. And I don't want you stepping on my feet. So we went to our local Fred Astaire in Tarrytown in New York. And we just learned a little first dance. You go to weddings and you do a little like a rumba or whatever for the first dance. And that's what we did. But then we got hooked on it. So we stayed at that studio for a couple years until we moved out of state. And then, so that was in 2000 and, 4, we moved out of state. And then we moved to North Carolina. A few years went by and he got a gift certificate for me for the local Fred Astaire here. And I said, that's great. When are we going? And he's like, no, there's no we. He said, it's just you. You're just going to go by yourself. He was done. But it was great because, taking like the individual lessons, you basically get to dance with a pro for the entire lesson and you can learn so much in that amount of time. And so I was like, okay. So then I was on my own and it's great. I do these pro-am competitions where, it's a professional and an amateur and the judges basically just score me as the amateur. But when you go to these ballroom studios, like the one near me, I feel so lucky because they've got these tremendous Ukrainian champions, world champions that are doing the instruction. And I feel so lucky to learn from them. I mean, it's just incredible the quality of people that they have at this particular studio. And so I feel lucky every day that I get to learn from these people. And hopefully I hope to keep it up forever until I drop dead and they can bury me under the ballroom floor.
I watched a couple of clips, Linda, that you had put up, and I was like, wow, talk about a workout and just coordination and, the just focus that you have to have to ballroom dance. I was like, dang. And now I understand why the guns are the way they are. I mean,
Oh, thank you.
uh,
Yeah, I
uh,
mean, some people call it dance sport, which is sort of more accurate than ballroom dance. Like it's very athletic. It really is a great workout. And so it's a sport and the people are working hard. I mean, to make those strides, to hold the frame, to make the turns, like it is a full body workout. Make no mistake, I am dripping in sweat at the end of it all. and my muscles are sore. And so recovery is very important. And protein is very important because it is a workout. These dancers are strong, and competition has just been getting fierce lately. I think because of the popularity of things like what's that show on TV, the ballroom dance.
Is it
It's
Dancing with the
Dancing with the
Stars?
Stars. Yeah, because of Dancing with the Stars, more and more people have gotten into ballroom. So there's more and more people at competitions, and competition's getting stronger. So the dancing is getting stronger. It's a tremendous sport. I highly recommend, and it's the kind of thing where you don't risk a huge amount of injury because there's not a lot of weights being thrown around. It's just a body weight thing, and so it's like I said, it's something you can do for a very long time, and it spans all ages. So yeah, it's a great athletic thing.
Where can folks find you on Instagram and YouTube? I know that's both.
So Instagram is at the Carnitarian. The YouTube channel currently is at the Carnitarian Life. I have a Facebook page, which is at the Carnitarian. So that would be great if people would head over there. I'm not very active there because there's just not a lot of people over there, but I'd love to build that some more too. But generally, if you want to find me, you can contact me on Instagram. And then all of the links, if you wanted to book a coaching session with me, all of my links are in the link tree on that Instagram account.
Here's something interesting that I get to share with you as I end out here is that when I listened to you on those initial podcasts, and I thought, man, that's a super cool name, the Carnitarian. I wish I had a thought of that. So I'm going to ask you as a two-parter, and I'll let you know that you inspired me to come up with the Carnivorist. And that,
Oh,
so the Carnivorist is, I chose it for a number of reasons. Number one, Christian Bale, I'm a big fan of his. He did a movie called The Machinist. And I was like thinking, I'm studying in the way of the carnivore diet. So you have people that are dentists who study in dentistry. You have, whatever the suffix ist means that you're studying in a certain discipline. So I was like, I am a carnivorist.
I love it.
But how did you come up with the name the Carnitarian and who came up with it?
Okay, so this is a funny story. So when I started in going, the first week that I joined that Facebook group, the very famous one, everybody knows, zeroing in on health, right? There had been people there for years, like the OGs had been there for years. And there I was, I walked myself into this Facebook group and I'm like, hey, everybody, my name's Linda and I would like to eat meat too. And I start having these conversations with people. And I said to them at one point, I said, I feel like ZC, like everyone was said, zero carb carnivore, like the zero carb carnivore. Like, why do we have to complicate it like that? Like, why do we call it out zero carb? There's some carbs in eggs and there's some carbs in liver. And so it's not really zero carb. It's kind of like just like being like a vegetarian, but with meat. Like, so you only eat vegetables, but you just eat meat. And so I was going to like the Latin root and I was like, well, it's like carna, and then the tarian is like a person who eats the carna, like the meat. So I had typed in there, why don't we call it a carnitarian diet? Like, isn't it more carnitarian? It's sort of like vegetarian. And the consensus among the commenters was like, get out of here, lady. You're new here. Don't try and rename things. It's not carnitarian. It's zero carb carnivore. Like, no. But I took that with me to Instagram and I was like, okay, well, now's my chance. I feel like a carnitarian diet is really what it is. And so I still get people arguing with me about that name. And some people think, well, if you're calling yourself a carnitarian, then you're not supposed to eat fish. And I'm like, listen, it's a made up name. It can be whatever I want it to be.
Dang right it can. And
Yeah.
it's an awesome name too. And I'm thinking to myself, man, that was a pretty cool. I was like, I wish I had a thought of that. And I was like, James, put on your thinking cap, the carnivorist, and thus is born
Yeah, I
carnivorous
think yours is
chats.
cool too. It's a cool name.
Thank you. And so as you see, we're on carnivorous chats today. I was like, if I'm going to do a podcast, I'm going to do it something that's kind of catchy too. So now we're going to have to come up. We're going to have to do a poll for a name for your podcast now.
Oh,
And we'll
yes.
think of it, but we'll definitely put
People
something
should
out there.
put that in the comments. Yeah. What
Definitely.
it should be.
Yeah. Listeners, that's it. That's your job now in the comments for Linda's new start of her podcast, and she's the Carnitarian. What is it going to be? Linda Salant, it has been such an honor and a privilege to have you on today. I really mean it. I want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for all the information you put out there. You were so helpful on my journey and to so many other people. And we just all want to say thank you. And I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the invite. It's been an absolute pleasure, nothing but a pleasure to speak to you. And so it's great. We'll have to do it again. It's been great to talk to you. And then now you're going to have to come on my YouTube channel.
Oh, I was hoping you were asked. I didn't want to come, but now I'm so excited now. I love
Good.
to. Awesome. I'll be happy to.
Thank you.
Like I said, Linda, if we do this again, I think we should get into, and one of the topics I didn't get to talk to you about today was some of the propaganda that we both ran into starting this way of eating. And I think that I'll put a pin in that for the next time, because there's a bunch of things, like meat rots in your colon and you're going to get cancer from red meat and all those things. But that's for the next time.
Absolutely. I'd love to go down that rabbit hole with you. Yes.
Linda, thanks again. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Carnivorist Chats. If you've made it this far, I want to say thank you for listening, and also thank you in advance for liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode. Thanks again to Equip Foods, Carnivore Snacks, and the Carnivore Bar. Don't forget to check the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products. Until the next time, be well,